I think it's really important that we realize that our kids don't want sometimes discipline and structure. We resist that as human beings in our sinful nature. And so it's important to have a loving, peaceful, calm family home if you can structure your home life like that in order for people to operate at their highest level. And when you have unique learners, that gets very complicated and messy. But I think overall, the relationships need to be primary.
Welcome. It's the Colorado Homeschool Podcast, interviewing experts, parents, graduates, all here to help you navigate this incredible journey called homeschooling. And if you're looking for resources, tips, and help, go to check.org. You'll find what you need. In the meantime, subscribe, follow along.
Well, hello and welcome. We're excited to have you again with us today. My name is Kashia Davis. I'm your host, and we have a friend, a colleague, and somebody that you're really going to want to get to know. Her name is Shari McMinn. She is the author of the Unique Learners blog for us. Well, and to say like that's the only thing she does is really an understatement. She has her hands in quite a lot of things at Check. At the Rocky Mountain Homeschool Conference Update magazine. You could probably talk more to that, Shari. She does everywhere I look, there's Shari involved. So we're excited. Shari is also on the board for SPED Homeschool, and today we're going to talk a lot about that. I don't know if you know what SPED Homeschool is, but if you are a parent of a unique learner, as we like to call them, then you might. And if you don't, maybe you should. So Shari, thank you for being here. We really are very blessed. Can you tell us a little bit about I should have done that. Let me just tell you, Shari has a large family. She's got 9 living children, 11 total. So she's lost a couple and done homeschooling through so many different phases of life. So can you just tell us a little bit about what started you in homeschooling, a little bit about how your family grew to be so big?
Yes, absolutely. So I was married to a wonderful man who absolutely loved children, and we would have had 100 if it was up to him.
Aw.
Um, and one thing about him was he was a mental level genius. So he was always dreaming and doing these crazy things. And that was my first glimpse of what a unique learner was. And we started having children, and my oldest son is my stepson from my husband's first marriage. And my husband just wanted to be happily married and have a big family. And so that's what we did when we got married. And my firstborn son had some learning issues at the public school that he was going to. And they said, "There's this new thing called homeschooling, and we think you guys would be really good at it. You should check it out." So I went to the Tattered Cover Bookstore in Denver. We live close to Cherry Creek, and checked out, actually purchased some books on homeschooling. There were like maybe 2 on the shelf. And so we devoured those, and we decided, yeah, homeschooling is a perfect fit for us because we're hands-on family. We like to be together. We like to be outside a lot. And I have an art background, but I also love science and math. And my husband, very similar, super logical left brain, but super creative right brain. So we went ahead and started homeschooling that son. And then we were just going to do it for a year to catch him up. And he had some reading issues, but we knew he was smart. And so we continued to homeschool because then the next born son was totally all over the page and would never have behaved in an institutional school because he's super curious and still is to this day. He's 35 and super curious and likes every day to be different. So we just continued down that path, and we ended up actually homeschooling for 28 years. I finished a couple years ago, but two of my 2 youngest kids went into the military. So after high school graduation, I still helped them do math and English so that they could boost their ASVAB scores. But the homeschooling journey for us really got complicated when we started adopting children. You know, children who are biologically related to you, who are born into a healthy, functional family, have very few issues. I mean, they still can have some things, but adopted children bring trauma with them, and they have a lot of baggage from their very early years when their executive functioning did not develop correctly, because they didn't get the nurturing they needed up until the age of 3. So, we had kids that we adopted who were extremely dyslexic, who were very cognitively delayed because their brains were on fire and they just could not receive and retain information. So, we started down the path of how in the world do we homeschool these kids? We know that they're smart, but their language skills were really behind because people had not talked to them, and so we began layer by layer peeling back the people that God created and put in our family. And eventually we got on track, and all of my children graduated from home high school on grade level. But for years they were behind. And I just believe that God would show us what to do, and He did.
Wow. Well, Sherry, just in that statement, there's so much for me to unpack. First, before we go in, I want to talk about the trauma issues that you dealt with in adoption and how you work through those. But before we do, I just want to highlight something that you said right off the bat. You talked about your husband being sort of a genius and that being your first introduction to unique learners. And I love that because we specifically, well, I don't know who started it, maybe you started calling this subset of the help that check provides unique learners because it doesn't necessarily only mean struggling, right?
That's correct. That's
So,
correct.
will you highlight what that means? Because obviously, there comes some challenges in relationships and other things, even with somebody who's extremely gifted.
I think, for highly gifted, people, my husband and several of my kids were highly gifted, are still highly gifted. They think in different ways than what we do as just a normal, average intelligence person. And, if you've ever seen the Temple Grandin film, um, she thought in pictures, and that's exactly how my husband thought, and several of my children did as well. And, having the hands-on element to help kids be very productive and do things with their hands is super important. I'm very, very concerned that we have a screen technology-based culture right now because kids, in my opinion, need to be outside playing and creating, building tree houses, having make pretend, medieval fights and just all kinds of crazy things. And of course, anything to a boy becomes a weapon, but my girls were like that too. I think that highly gifted students awfully often are delayed in their social and emotional functioning, so they don't express themselves well. They can have a very quick, hot temper. That was my husband. He would just explode for no reason, and we would have to, everybody step back, chill out. And it wasn't that he intentionally did that, he was just reactive. So he had to learn to control that. And, thankfully, we were Christians, and the Holy Spirit filled him and wanted to give him peace and joy. And that really helped us as we raised some unique learner children who had similar issues. I would say, especially adopted children, have behavioral issues that are sometimes overwhelming because they do not trust their new family, their adoptive family. So you have to really work on relationships in order to build that trust. But I think that's true of every type of student learner. The relationship is paramount. Of course, the relationship with God comes first, then the relationship with the parent and child, and then the relationship with the siblings. And I'm sort of all over the page here about this, but I think it's really important that we realize that our kids don't want to sometimes discipline and structure. We resist that as human beings in our sinful nature. And so it's important to have a loving, peaceful, calm family home if you can structure your home life like that in order for people to operate at their highest level. And when you have unique learners, that gets very complicated and messy. But I think overall, the relationships need to be primary. I just was talking to a family at the Rocky Mountain Homeschool Conference who I see year after year. They're raising their grandchildren. It's very stressful. The kids have experienced a lot of trauma. And I said, you've got to focus on relationship with God and relationship with each other. The learning will come. Their brains have to calm down, stop being on fire in order for them to able to accept the information that you want to input into them, and then they can put that into long-term memory and recall it later. Um,
Well,
it's
you've said that
really
phrase a few times now, "Their brains are on fire." What do
Yeah,
you mean by
so
that?
I think what happens when there is a lot of trauma in someone's past, they are in fear, flight, and fight mode all the time. I'm thinking particularly about one of my daughters who literally did not get math until her senior year in high school. Then finally, her brain calmed down and she like, "Oh, I get multiplication and division now." But for all those years, she had trust issues and she kept fighting me on everything. She wanted to run out of the room. She wanted to argue. She wanted to just get this glassy-eyed look and freeze over. And this is a primal instinct that God gives all of us in order to survive. And so, a lot of times, with especially adopted children who were in foster care, they are in survival mode. And so, they have to learn to trust you and they have to really learn to trust God that He has His hand in their life and He's got them. And it takes a long time to develop that. And kids cannot develop that with a computer. They have to
Mhm.
develop that with a human
One-on-one.
being, and
Yeah,
that human being is their parents.
yeah. This is much more than just talking about adoption. However, a lot of what you're saying, I think, is applicable to every parent. Like, I hear a lot of families that are struggling with homeschooling, and the root of it is the relationships, is the structure, is maybe the discipline. And when I say discipline, I'm not saying one form necessarily because God created us all differently, right? But can you go back to that a little bit? I'm thinking of the verse when you were talking of the boundaries have fallen in the pleasant places. How did you start that journey of bringing home children and adopting them? And do you remember that transition? What was that like? Because your whole everything had to change.
Yes. So, what is the backstory to our adoption is we had a baby that died very suddenly as an infant, and we had great loss. I was unable to have more children at that point in time. And I believe God planted the seed in my husband and my heart to adopt children. We did not want to do foster care because we already had loss and we didn't want to give kids back that came to us. It's a real calling to do foster care. We need more Christians to do it. I personally could not have done it, and neither could my husband. But we did get kids who came to us as foster care placements in a foster to adopt situation. So their parental rights were being terminated. They were going to be legally free to adopt. So when we talked to the caseworkers, we adopted through child welfare through the state of Colorado. We said that we will take children that are a challenge to place. We think we're very highly experienced, hands-on parents. We have a very, very strong marriage. We have a strong Christian faith, and at that time, we lived on a farm. We had a lot of room for the kids. We had plenty of bedrooms. We had plenty of outdoor space. It wasn't fancy, but it was adequate. And so we said we would adopt siblings because siblings are very hard to place, and that we would do a transracial adoption because that can be a challenge and a difficulty. There are not enough parents of color to adopt the children that are needed. And so we said that we are a white family, but we would adopt anybody that needs a family. So we got a placement of a 5 and a 7-year-old who were siblings, and they were African American and Hispanic from their background. And the age was important because our youngest child was 8, and I really, really feel that it's wise for everyone's safety to adopt children who are younger than your biological children because, first of all, you do not wanna disrupt the birth order, and second of all, adopted children can have behaviors that come out of nowhere, and so the older your biological children are, the more they can help keep those kids safe, but also keep themselves safe. So we adopted a 5 and a 7-year-old, and the honeymoon, where they were perfectly wonderful, lasted about 6 months, and then it was like a hurricane hit us. We were prepared. The one thing that we probably could have done is have counseling in place before the children came to us. A good Christian family counselor. We actually got one later, but it would have been helpful to have it before in place, so that our kids could talk to the counselor, our biological kids could talk to the counselor, my husband and I could talk to the counselor, we could discuss what fears we might have with this pending placement. So I do recommend that for families who are considering adoption. It's also super important for a husband and wife to maintain a very, very strong marriage when you adopt. So, our oldest kids were teenagers and they could babysit while my husband and I would go out for like an hour or two, but then the behavior of our adopted children became unsafe with the older siblings babysitting them. So we had to have dates at home. And that's something fun that I include in my book on adoption is
I was going to
75
say,
dates that you can do
oh,
with
I love
25
that.
things from the dollar store
Yeah, I was gonna
because
reference the books that Sherry has written several books. She's written 5, and she's got another one she's working on right now. So, from so many different vantage points, and I love the story of adoption. And I think it's a real big part, obviously, of your story and how you dealt with the unique learners. But just for the purpose of our podcast today, just talking to families, not even assuming that it was from adoption, but how did that impact your world dealing with? Was there a shift and you already sort of hinted at that. Was it more relationship focused at first? And you were like, the learning will come. We got to get like life balance. Tell me
yeah.
how that, because at 5 and 7, and you had kids in high school down to 8, you were doing a one-room schoolhouse. So how did
Yeah,
that
it
impact
was
your
it was
your
a
education?
It was a crazy one-room schoolhouse, but somehow it worked. We had a rhythmic routine.
Oh, good.
So,
Yep.
we would get up in the morning at a reasonable time. We were not early rising farmers. We got up around 8 o'clock, and we helped our kids do animal chores because they needed the physical activity first thing in the morning. Then we would come in and we would have family breakfast, and if my husband was available, we'd do a Bible devotion at that point in time. And then we would start on school, and I would start with the most problematic child. So the one who had the greatest struggles with reading and math, and that's what we focused on, was reading, writing, and arithmetic. And I would sit at the kitchen table one-on-one and work with each child, working my way up, usually from the youngest to the oldest. And the older kids could do a lot of work on their own, but I still worked with them. And while children were waiting for their time with me at the kitchen table, they would be doing piano or art lessons, creative play in the living room, creative play outside. And I did try to check on my kids every 15 minutes to make sure everybody was safe. But apparently, they were doing things at 14 minutes and 59 seconds that I didn't know about. But
You
now
found
that
them out
yeah,
later,
now
yeah.
that they're all grown, they're filling me in on those things. I'm like, "What? Can't believe that, nobody died from a bicycle accident." Anyway, and then we work our way through the morning routine of reading, writing, and arithmetic, and then we would then break for lunch, and the kids would take turns helping prepare lunch, and then after lunch we'd go outside and we'd have recess. And I want you to know that I played baseball, I played volleyball and basketball because we had like a whole team with all those kids. And my kids loved doing that, and so did I. And that was probably one of the best relationship builders every day, is that we just laughed and had fun. And then I put the younger kids down for naps, and then the older kids, we do science, history, that kind of a thing. We tried to organize our errands on just one day a week. That way we were home. It is called homeschooling, not car schooling. Um, and we were home to do our schoolwork, and then I sent them outside no matter how much snow was on the ground, no matter how hard the wind was blowing or how hot it was. They went outside for a couple hours so I could get a mental break, and that was important for me. Um, Sometimes my husband was home during the day, sometimes he wasn't. He taught college and he also had architecture clients. He was an architect, but he was also outside working on the farm. And then at night, we'd have dinner together and we would just all relax. And the best thing that my husband did was he took over bedtime. So he would get the kids teeth brushed in pajamas and then read them a story, usually in the youngest one's room. And they read all the great books like Pilgrim's Progress and, King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. And my kids just still talk about how they loved that dad read them a bedtime story every night.
Yeah, those read
And
alouds have been pivotal in our life as well. We loved that time together.
yeah, and then he would pray with each of them and tuck them in bed, and during that time, then I'd be doing dishes, maybe talking to one kid, helping me, that kind of a thing. But it was very, very helpful that he was a hands-on dad, super involved in homeschooling. One of the best things I think that can happen in a homeschool family. And then after he passed away, I was a single mom and homeschooling, and that was a challenge. But I got through it because I did not want to re-traumatize my children by doing something different. So we just stayed on our farm and continued to homeschool, and it worked, and we just stuck with it. And that's the best advice I can give anybody, is you just do not give up.
hmm Yeah, I'm hearing you say things that are applicable to anybody, that whole structure, routine, and having a plan. It matters. Even if you are loosey-goosey, like we're one of the podcasts that we're about to do for the Colorado Homeschool Podcast is on different learning styles and methodologies. So I was kind of a crazy unit study, let's build things, let's learn by activities. And then I had friends who were like, no, we're following the textbooks and we're doing these lessons, from A to Z, where I was like, no, let's just jump over there. And that doesn't even matter, even if I was wild. And that's what I'm hearing you say is I needed still to have routine. And we did. We had like a daily routine, a daily checklist of the basics, reading, writing, and arithmetic. And then all the fun was sprinkled in, but even that was on routine. And that helps regardless of where you are on special needs or brain trauma or whatever. We all need that, right?
Yes, and I think that, there were days when absolutely no homeschooling got done, but it was still homeschooling. So we might not have done reading, writing, arithmetic, science, history, civics, but we did, you know, family therapy and just working together. We had a lot of grief. My husband died. Well, we had a baby that died. That happened early on, and then my husband died, and then I had another daughter who died as a teenager, so we just had ongoing trauma that we had to work through as a family. And some days it was just life skills, and that was fine. We were farmers, so some days it was a lamb was having an emergency at birth, and we all had to go outside and work on that. But overall, God just really was merciful and gracious. And now that my children are adults, it is amazing to me the wonderful human beings they are, but also they're super accomplished in the things that they dreamed as a child. And my husband and I help them attain step by step, day by day.
Hmm. Well, Sherry, I often reach out to you whenever I encounter a family that has a specific need. And I'm always surprised that you're like, oh, you need XYZ. Like you always have the perfect resources. So how did that come to be? Because you're on the SPED homeschool board. And why don't you talk about what SPED is and what they do, and how you became sort of the expert? And I guess you're comforting people with the comfort you've been given, right?
Right. So I joined the SPED Homeschool Board about 3 years ago, and there's a number of just excellent people on the board who have raised special needs children, or they have special needs licensing, education, and experience. And the SPED Homeschool website is a vast resource of all kinds of articles and podcasts and testing suggestions. Before SPED Homeschool existed, I actually was able to get resources through Czech. The Czech guidebook has an excellent chapter called Different Learners, chapter 9, I believe it is, and that has self-diagnostic tests that parents can do for their kids. I also have been a longtime follower of Diane Kraft and her right brain training. I had several kids who were very dyslexic, have delayed readers, and I did believe in teaching cursive writing, which Diane really stresses, because when you make the infinity sign or do curving letters, you cause your brain to store things from the right short-term memory to the long-term memory in your left brain. And I also had children who had a lot of health issues, and so having Diane Kraft or her trained people diagnose nutritional deficits and how to help with fish oil and different types of things was very, very helpful. One of my children had a lot of issues that related to their gut health. And because we thankfully lived on a farm, we could consume raw dairy and make our own yogurt from that. And that really helped the kids. We said, the standard American diet wasn't good for us, but the farm diet was great for us. And we just really fed our kids' brains with healthy fat. One of the things that I'm concerned about with children in this day and age is kids are on low fat or no fat milk at an early age. And Diane's research and others that she cites says that our brains in the midline need healthy fat. So bacon, milk, fat, that kind of thing. And we raised hogs, so we had no problem with bacon fat. Um, but that you need protein in the morning, and so we would have, bacon and eggs and hash browns or sausage gravy on biscuits or whatever. We had a hearty diet, and my husband preferred to have big meals at breakfast and lunch and then something light at supper. So we just always have done that, and that really helped our kids. Especially our adopted kids, were very malnourished as young children, and when they came to us, their muscle tone wasn't necessarily very good. My son, who's 22 right now and in the Army, when he came to us, he was 2 years old and weighed 12 pounds, and his head was huge compared to
Wow.
his body. Yeah. And so we put him on our farm diet, and 6 months later at his health checkup, the nurses are like, wow, look at the leg muscles on this kid. And I said, yeah, because he does trampoline every single day of his life. And so you have to look at children
Yeah.
holistically, whether
I
they're your
you're saying the
birth
word I was
children.
thinking,
Right, whether
holistically.
they're your birth children, adopted children, it doesn't matter. We are whole people that God created with, a brain and a backbone and a vertebrae and a spinal column and everything, and it all works together. And just as the church is an image of all the different parts of a body, um, we function best when our whole body is fed and exercised and exposed to, I believe, outdoor sun and weather.
So speaking of holistically, some of it can be overwhelming. Like, how do you know where to start? And we just did the Unique Learners seminar right before the Rocky Mountain Homeschool Conference, and following that, we did a meetup, which it was basically just a chance to make community with people who are like you in the same boat. And I love it so much because you see these parents who are desperate, who are overwhelmed, who don't know where to turn, and they're just they don't even need like icebreakers or anything. They just immediately find one another and start talking because they don't know where to go, what to look for, how to find those resources. And so I mean, we live in the information age, and still it's like there's contradictory information about holistic, like you said, low fat diet, high fat diet. I mean, all of this. So speak to that. Like, how do you encourage somebody to find the right because what works for one family isn't going to necessarily work for the other. So how do they find their solution?
I think this is really important to discuss. I do believe that God gives parents an instinct to observe and know what's going on with their child. And I say start with the first thing. What is the most out of control situation your child has? Is it their temper? Is it their health? It's probably all related, but just work on the first main thing. And sometimes that's relationship. And so that's all you can work on. But I think that it's really important to seek the Lord as to what your child needs because He created your child, whether by birth or adoption. He put your child in your family and He will give you a gut instinct as to what's going on. It could be diet. I love the fact that RFK Jr. is going to cut back on food dyes and everything else. I think that's a big trigger. Um, the second thing that I think is important to be in a community where other people are observing your child, not judging them, but coming alongside of you and able to give you advice. And so I recommend two sources of that for every single family that's homeschooling, which is number one, I do believe you should be in some sort of a homeschool cooperative group. And it doesn't have to be, super fancy or anything, but just get together with a couple other homeschool families, even if it's just play day at the park. Because then the parents can sit and talk and watch the kids have some interaction with other kids, but just having parents who can say, hey, I'm having a horrible day, will you pray for me? I don't know what to do about my child. And it's amazing how God will make divine appointments and bring the right person to you to talk about that. The second type of community that I am a super big believer in is belonging to a church that is supportive, number one, of children, number two, of unique people, and number three, families who homeschool. And it's hard to find a church like that, but there are more of them. Um, because the reason you go to church is to worship with like minded believers and also to have some sort of accountability with the elders and the pastors in the church. There's a lot of women that complain that their husband isn't doing enough. And I say, is he under the authority of elders in a church? Well, no, we don't go to church. I'm like, okay, that's a good gang. Go to a church, help your husband make friends with the elders and other men in the church, encourage him to go to men's Bible study or just meet one on one with the pastor because husbands have a very hard job. They're supposed to be the shepherd of the family. But if nobody is shepherding them, they're not going to know how to lead their wives and children. And I don't mean in a tyrannical way, I mean in a gentle and loving way. We raised sheep on our farm and we were gentle with them. And Jesus is the good shepherd. He's gentle with us, and a good shepherding pastor is gentle with his flock or congregation. So I think it's very important that you are with like-minded people. Then if you can belong to some sort of special needs group, maybe your kid has dyslexia. So find some other families that who are struggling with dyslexia. It could be through a library, it could be through a Facebook page, but learn from other people what they've tried, what they haven't tried. And certainly, like on the Czech website, I love our website. It's so huge, sometimes it's hard to find things. But on our Unique Learners page, we have recommended therapists, we have support groups. Um, if people will just take an hour out of their day to find out what is available as a resource or support for them, I think they would find something.
Mhm.
Um, and it's hard, especially if you live remotely, to find a good church. We actually drove 2 hours for
Wow.
about 7 years to go to a good church that supported us. And we just pack
2
all the
hours
kids in
one
the
way?
car and take snacks. And
Wow.
gas was expensive, but we just made it work because it was, people say you got to find your tribe. It was our
Mhm.
tribe. There
Mhm.
were other people with adopted kids. There were very, very loving shepherds in the way of pastors and elders. I'm still friends with all of those people, even though I live far away from them. Yeah. If I visit, I go to that church because I consider it my home church. They've been through everything with me. So I think you have to prepare for a long battle. And what does that mean? It means you got to gird yourself. You got to put on the full armor of God. You got to find your tribe, your warriors, your prayer warriors especially. Um I think you need to find at least one person, if not more than that, who can pray regularly for you if you're having issues. I mean, just any homeschool family really needs prayer covering because the enemy does not
He
like
wants to
that
devour,
we
right.
are doing Christian homeschool
Mhm.
discipleship. He does not like it, and he's going to fight every tooth and nail. He's going to cause car wrecks, and he's going to cause sickness, and he's going to cause husbands and wives to pit fights with each other. So you just really have to be very proactive. Right now in our country, we're trying to build up our military for defense, not for offense. And I think that's what you have to do with your family too. You have to develop your defensive strategies for when the enemy hits. And I wish I'd known early on in my marriage that when things start going downhill, get on your knees and pray right then. Get your kids, pray right then. A lot of times I would just try to solve it in my own ability, and it's like, okay, it's just piling up so thick. We have to pray. And so prayer should be your very first battle cry. And get your kids involved with that. And even though they don't know the Lord, they will see that you know the Lord. And with homeschooling, more things are caught than taught. And so your kids see how you're reacting, and hopefully it's positively reacting. You're going to God right away when um, Susie and Johnny are fighting one more time, or your husband is frustrating you one more time. So, kids, there's a lot of chaos right now. Let's just all pray. And praying first thing in the morning, praying at mealtime, praying during math, praying during science, praying when somebody does not understand, how to read. Um,
And
all of
things are
these things.
misfiring in the brain, yeah.
Yes,
What I'm
God
hearing from you,
wants us
Sherry,
to
is
go
ex
to Him. He is the
exactly.
master and the creator, and He also wants us to find like-minded Christians to do battle with.
Mhm. I love it. I'm hearing a lot of hope in everything you're saying, just, not to focus on the everything, but focus on the one thing and take that one thing to the Lord, and you're so right. I call it holy echoes when you need help with something and you just coincidentally, I mean, that doesn't we just heard this at the Rocky Mountain Homeschool Conference. One of the keynote speakers said that word coincidence doesn't exist in the original Hebrew language because there is no coincidence. God provided those connections, that comment, that suggestion from somebody and that community, and it can be found one at a time. And Sherry, I feel like we could keep going, but I hope that this draws people, encourages them, gets them to go look at those resources. We'll link obviously the Unique Learners blog from Czech. We'll put that below, but also SPED Homeschool. There's so many great resources, and Sherry's got some great books that she wrote that you can dig into that too. So all of that will be below. So thank you so much, Sherry. When we close, we like to ask all of our guests, and it can be related to this topic or otherwise, but what would you consider to be the best piece of advice that you received as a homeschool mom?
I would say from my viewpoint now that I'm beyond my homeschooling years is you just absolutely never give up. And I told that to my kids who were struggling. I told that to my husband. And I said, as long as we're together, we can keep going forward. So just
Yeah.
never, ever give up. And try to see the child that God gave you, and He loves that child even more than you do,
Mhm.
and He will never give up on that child, and you should not either.
Well, it's like the child that you said as a senior in high school, finally math clicked. That would be so exasperating and so hard from a homeschool mom's perspective, but just to be faithful, plow on, be consistent, do what we can do. And it's kind of that idea, right? Like the results are the Lord's. I'm going to be faithful with what He's asked me to do. And then what He
Yes.
does with that is His work. Wow. Well, that was encouraging, Sherry. Thank you. That's a great way to end the conversation. Again, I'm going to post all the links in the show notes so you can find more resources, help, and encouragement. And I hope that this was a blessing to you all. Thank you, Sherry, for being with us today.
Yes, thank you for having me. It was great.
Thank you so much for joining us today. The Colorado Homeschool Podcast is a ministry of Christian home educators of Colorado. We have been motivating parents to disciple the next generation by embracing home discipleship that is Christ-centered, parent-directed, and free from government control. We invite you to join us in this mission. If you want to support homeschooling in Colorado, go to check.org/donate. In the meantime, share this with your friends and make sure you subscribe. That really helps us. Thank you.
Brought to you by thepodcastupload.com, empowering faith-driven voices.